Hey, everybody, welcome back to Therapist Uncensored. Sue Marriott here, and I'm very excited to bring you a very special guest, Nigel Denning. The reason that I'm excited about this is, as many of you know, if you're longtime listeners, we have covered quite a bit on this movement around psychedelics and psychedelic-assisted therapy. And I have said, all along that I'm cautious about some of the enthusiasm or the evangelicism around it, around any idea, actually. And Nigel is going to be able to give us some rich history and really give us the state of the art. So, Nigel, can you describe yourself and give folks some context?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sue. Nice to be here and nice to be with you.
Yeah, so happy.
Um, I got introduced into non-ordinary state work around 1986, where I met some people who were practicing holotropic breath work, which was a program developed by Stanislav Grof back in the sort of late 1970s after psychedelics were made illegal across the world. So I've had a kind of a 40-year history, and then about 5 years ago I was invited in by Mind Medicine Australia to develop a training program for therapists in psychedelic-assisted therapy. And we developed a program and trained about 300 therapists in that model. And I've also subsequently found myself as lead clinician in a number of trials using psilocybin and MDMA for a variety of presentations. I'm a counselling psychologist, and I'm managing director of Integrative Psychology and Medicine in Melbourne. And I've been working in this field for, as I say, close to 30 years now.
And David Elliott is a mutual friend of ours and who brought us together. What kind of work are you doing with Dr. Elliott?
Yeah, well, David, I met through another one of my mentors, Dan Brown, and Dan and David, of course, developed an approach to treating attachment disturbance in adults, and so with Dan's passing, sadly, a few years back, we worked with David to provide an online and in-person training for people interested in learning techniques around attachment repair in adults. And so we launched that earlier this year, the Integrative Attachment Therapy program.
And I must say, I've got to jump in here because Anne and I both have checked that program out. And again, if you're longtime listeners, you know of our close relationship with David Elliott. This is the best, if you're a clinician, this is the state-of-the-art training for clinicians that I think that is out there. And I highly recommend it. And if you are interested, please use our affiliate code and you will get a discount. You can find that in our show notes. But the email for the course is what? If you'll go ahead and say that.
You can email us at info@integrative-attachment-therapy.com.
That's right. Highly recommend it. It's fantastic, multidisciplinary, very interactive, very, very well done. So I commend you for that work. It's really incredible.
Thanks, Sue. Yeah, it's been a labour of love over a number of years now.
Yes. I have some idea of the work that has gone into it. It is really, really, really fantastic. So part of what interested me so much in your perspective is that you're based in Australia, which is ahead of us related to legalization of psychedelics. So I love looking ahead about what's coming. There's so much excitement. Everybody, again, there's, and me too. I'm very, very excited about it as well. But why don't you give us, first of all, before we get into any of the cautions, what's the state of the state? What's the state of, what's the current status? And why are people so excited about these molecules?
Yeah, so in Australia, 1st of July, I think last year, we legalised psilocybin and MDMA for a variety of treatment-resistant conditions. It's been a fairly stringent kind of rollout and came as quite a surprise, actually. There'd been a lot of political lobbying in Australia to introduce these medicines, but certainly we didn't expect legalization to happen as quickly as it did, but now we've got a program whereby psychiatrists are designated prescribers, and they have to go through a specific training program to gain the rights for prescription. And there's a number of programs now starting to roll out across the country, specifically with MDMA or psilocybin for conditions such as treatment-resistant depression, anxieties, obsessive-compulsive disorder, PTSD. They're quite a rapid kind of burgeoning in the field.
So, as somebody who has been in on the trials themselves and in training therapists, again, this is just like why people are excited about it. What are you seeing as far as the efficacy of these chemicals, of these natural, some natural, some not, molecules?
Yes. Well, what they offer is an opportunity for people who have not had success in other treatments, either psychological treatments or medical treatments. I think what is particularly kind of impassioning for people in this field is that it's moving away from the focus on therapy as dealing specifically and solely with negative states. And a lot of our medication regimes, for instance, are about suppressing symptom rather than transforming. And I think that's the kind of the exciting part of psychedelics for people, is that they create the conditions for new opportunity. And this is really a very different approach to psychotherapy than most of us have got used to over the last 50 years, which is really all about symptom amelioration and symptom reduction, rather than this kind of transformational kind of process.
Well, and it has ridiculously higher efficacy than like your Prozacs, your antidepressants, even like one trial. It's almost, again, the way that I understand it is, can be life changing, like a
Yeah,
one again, used therapeutically, used in these very controlled settings.
yeah. I mean, so for instance, the MAPS trials, the MDMA for PTSD trials, that really led the way in across the world, and was really central to Australians legalising. They were getting about an 80% reduction, and about 60, 65, 67% reduction to below cutoff score for PTSD. So that meant that people were no longer, 2/3 of participants were no longer meeting criteria for PTSD, and then on top of that, another 15% were getting significant reduction in symptoms. So that's 4 out of 5 patients are getting amelioration of their symptoms. Taking into account that these are also trials, so a number of people were also excluded, so they're bringing in a kind of a control group for treatment. But nonetheless, I mean, this is a really significant move forward in what we've got available to us for treatment of people that haven't responded to anything previously.
And what is your? I like talking. Let's talk for a minute about MDMA, because that gets less attention as far as that I'm aware of. It's I know that it was just there was a big news here in the United States that it got some negative reports. It might be turned down in the FDA. Do you know about that? What's
Yeah,
happening there?
yeah. So that's a problem, kind of a structural problem in the treatment regime. So what we're kind of struggling with at the moment is we don't have a robust enough theory of mind and brain to explain fully the kind of workings of these medicines. And so what's happened with the MAPS program is that they've drawn on Stanislav Grof's work from. He was a lead in LSD psychotherapy back in the 60s and 70s. He was Harvard based for a number of years and was a research psychiatrist. After the criminalisation of psychedelics, he went down to Esalen down in California, became a scholar in residence there, taking over that role from Fritz Perls, the father of Gestalt therapy. And Stan developed there with his wife Christina something called holotropic breathwork. And this is a technique where people work in group, in pairs. They engage in faster and deeper breathing with eye shades, laying on a mattress to a curated music set. And it's a state change technology. So as you hyperventilate, you go into an experience that is not dissimilar to MDMA or psilocybin. It sort of has a quality that's similar to both of those medicines. And there's a whole kind of 30-year tradition in holotropic breathwork of, using these skills that were learned in the 60s and 70s about supporting psychedelic work through set and setting, through unconditional positive regard, a very, very, very humanistic and very client-centered way of working. And that program became the basis of the MAPS protocols. They used the structures of holotropic breathwork as their way of working with non-ordinary states using MDMA. The sticking point in it all was that central to Stan Groff's work, and therefore the MAPS program, is an idea that there's an inner healing potential or inner healing mechanism. Now, this has really never been explicated fully. And so what then happens is you've got an explanation of change that's not really explored scientifically. What you've got is 30 or 40 years of people kind of learning to do this work and to support and really do it well in a kind of clinical way, but not having a really good research explanation for what and why they're doing it. So what's happened is that people haven't got a kind of a clear explanatory paradigm for the work. It's meant that I think some people have got quite confused in how to apply the work. It's created some boundary issues in treatment. People have been working a bit over enthusiastically, and then that's brought a whole lot of criticism from a more kind of sophisticated research perspective. And so the criticism of the MAPS work in psychedelics that's just recently been raised in a subcommittee of your FDA is really that they view MAPS as a cult. And this is because, and I've done a lot of work in cults myself over the last 20 years in a different context in my work. And whilst I don't believe that that's the case, I don't think MAPS is operating as a cult. What they do have is a kind of an internal language and an internal kind of practice system that isn't totally transparent to research. And I think what that does then is it creates boundary issues, creates an uncertainty, which then people respond to quite understandably with skepticism and in some cases outright criticism. There are some fairly serious cases of people being wounded through inappropriate treatment during the MAPS trials.
Wow! So during the actual trials, oh man, that's terrible.
One of the issues with psychedelic work, and what Groff discovered very early on in his LSD work, was towards the end of sessions, after people have been in the psychedelic state hour after hour after hour, as they're starting to emerge from the full intoxication, they'll report often pains in their body or sensations in their body. And what Groff started to do was apply pressure to these points, just a little bit of contact. And that then opened up a whole new kind of process within the people. And done ethically, done appropriately, then it can work towards resolution. But it's involved human touch. And that's certainly not the domain of psychology, psychotherapy, psychiatry. And so whilst, a lot of the other allied health practices, like obviously like massage or chiropractic and professions like that, utilize touch, do it ethically, and have very stringent controls around it. That hasn't been the case in psychology and psychiatry, and so bringing touch into this domain of non-ordinary state work has created a hell of a lot of confusion around intense transference, intimacy,
Oh yeah,
particularly when you're dealing with
totally.
traumatized
Especially when you're
people.
coming out of such a vulnerable state.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, there's some psychology, like somatic work and stuff like that, but it is done so carefully
yeah,
and with so much consent and so much,
yeah,
but yeah, no, this is entirely different. Oh, I can see. So basically there was a subcommittee that wrote a letter to the FDA
yeah.
expressing concern. So this is going to most likely stop the MDMA trials. Is that
Well,
right?
well, we don't know about that. I think what it looked like in America was um, that MDMA was going to be registered as a unique treatment for certain conditions this year. This has cast doubt on it. So something like 7 out of 9 members of the advisory panel have voted against um, legalising MDMA, and there's some fairly significant submissions made that were highly critical of of the MAPS program.
So
So
this
that
is yeah.
so the
So
decision will be
that's
made
really
later.
has changed the trajectory for because one of the things that I'm super excited about with psychedelics and some of these molecules is what well this is both what I'm excited about and also one of the concerns I think that we can talk about eventually here. But the it should be much more accessible because that it's a single a single incident, one treatment, one correctly administered treatment session can be life changing, and that is true. um, and that these molecules are relatively inexpensive. um, again, you have the cost around, so on one hand they are should be more accessible. On the other hand, in practice,
Yeah.
the way that these are rolling out, it's the exact opposite. So let's table that though for just a minute because I want to go back to MDMA for just a second around this idea of what works and also your history with Groff, right? That you work
Hmm.
directly with him. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, Stan had a great passion for and has. He's still with us. I think he's just turned 90 recently. But he's had an extraordinary passion for non-ordinary state work and the healing potential of non-ordinary states. So, and his kind of background was in really in the core of the anti-psychiatry movement in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, where people that were really suffering were essentially incarcerated into psychiatric institutions and were heavily medicated, and there were no real treatment options. And so Stan grew up in that kind of environment where this was really kind of the extreme opposite. This kind of hopeful, because this idea that the healing quality in the psychedelic experience is the numinous experience. That the Good Friday experiment that was conducted at Harvard back in the 60s, 10 students, religious studies students, were given a dose of psilocybin. Rick Doblin, the head of MAPS, went and revisited them 30 years later, and 8 out of 10 of them were still stating that experience that they had back in the Good Friday experiment was one of the 5 most transformative experiences of their life. So can be, under the right settings, an extremely powerful, positive, constructive experience. And so Stan was very, very impassioned by that.
And
And
in your relationship with Stan is
so I was a student of Stan's for a number of years. I initially I started working with a guy called Al Foote and his wife Muriel, who were direct students of Groff at Esalen. And through my involvement with Stan and Muriel, I met with Alf and Muriel. I met Stan Groff, and then spent about 10 years going around the world working in various different workshops. And we had 2 2 years, we met at Hans Rudi Giger's castle in Switzerland. Giger got the Oscar for designing the alien monster. So not quite the ideal setting, I guess, for non-ordinary state work, but we kind of met, about 30 of us, and we had this sort of extraordinary experience meeting Albert Hofmann, the developer of LSD, the inventor of LSD, or the discoverer of it, in these kind of very kind of tight containers where we worked in the holotropic model, and just really learned a lot about how to support people in non-ordinary state, how to construct the container, how to train people, how to support, and when the work's done well, it's extraordinarily powerful and extraordinarily safe.
That's amazing that you were in on it. Was such a incredible part of history, really. And
Yeah,
what an honor to have you here and being able to walk us through this. So thank you.
yeah. He's a remarkable guy, Hoffman. He described he was nearing his 100th birthday when we were working with him, and he was describing a flower in his garden in Switzerland, and just talking about the chemical molecules that created the pigments and the aromas. He's a biological scientist, but he was talking as a mystic and a poet, but using the language of science. So it's quite extraordinary fellow.
Oh man, that is incredible. So what then, based on all of this experience that you have from this incredible group of people, the training, the trials that you've been in, um, like what is your understanding right now, if we stick with MDMA, on what is your theory on what is so like what's actually happening in the brain? Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, so this has sort of been work that was done in Imperial College as well. There's good theory that's come out, at least at the level of biology. So Robin Carhart Harris developed the work of Friston free energy principle, which is the sort of idea that the brain is constantly creating new connections. We've got something like 10 trillion neural circuits in our brain, more than there are stars in the universe, in each of our skulls. It's quite an extraordinary organ, but it's constantly making these new neural connections, new neural pathways. Some get reinforced, others don't. So when something gets reinforced, then a pathway is established. And so what then happens when someone's growing up, say in a difficult environment, or someone's exposed to a difficult environment, what happens is that the brain starts to align itself in response to the environment in such a way as to optimize survival. So imagine, if someone's in a traumatic experience, and particularly in a kind of a constant traumatizing experience rather than a singular incident, but say growing up in an abusive family or growing up in a war zone or something like that, what's happening is that the brain is constantly adapting to the adverse stimulus, and it creates something called a default mode network, which is a very, very strong kind of biologically based learning about how to navigate the world. So you take the person out of the traumatic environment and put them into, something kind of more healthy or less stressful. The brain is still responding to that environment as if it's in that primary trauma. So what happens with something like MDMA? We switch off the executive functioning. That's all about organisation to meet with the traumatic circumstance, and you create these different possibilities. You allow for different neural pathways to establish. And that's essentially the kind of the action of MDMA. Reduces the kind of the default programming, creates opportunity for new pathways to emerge.
And one of the things that I have understand from somewhere, I don't know where, that I somehow picked this up, was that one of the magic things about MDMA in particular, different than psilocybin, was this function related to maybe it's oxytocin, but something turning down the fear center so that you could see the and re-experience and
Yeah.
revisit some of these traumatic memories without that flood of the fear
That's right. Yeah,
experience.
yeah. So what it does is it reduces the dominance of adrenocortical organisation, which is what your fear response system is, and it optimizes serotonin. So you're getting this kind of down regulation of adrenaline, upregulation through upregulation of serotonin. You're getting a more equal distribution of serotonin through the
And
brain.
then is oxytocin a part of this chemistry?
Oxytocin is related to the kind of bonding experience.
Right.
Serotonin is the good feeling, the feelings of safety and trust in relationship.
Right.
Oxytocin is more of the kind of the bonding that we experience in kind of love relationships and real
Right. I
safety.
just always think of MDMA being associated with oxytocin because of all of the benevolence and the good feeling and the
Yeah, yeah.
love feeling and things like that.
I think a lot of that came from there was a period in the 80s before MDMA, because MDMA has a different kind of historical passage than psilocybin or LSD. And so MDMA was legal in the mid 80s. This is all the work of Schenken and his group. But it was used in couples therapy. And
Oh,
so when,
interesting. I
when
didn't
you
know
get
that.
when you get the upregulation of the serotonin, then you get the opportunity for the oxytocin to amplify, and so it was being used quite constructively in couples therapy in moderate doses.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay. And so if we shift just briefly to what we're understanding now about psilocybin, and then we'll can move to what the concerns are and what you've seen on your end.
Yep, yep.
So what's
Um,
good about what are we learning? What through the trials and stuff around psilocybin in particular?
yeah, so psilocybin has a similar kind of process where it deactivates executive function. What psilocybin does is it kind of it's like an anarchy of the brain. It just allows for free association of neural pathways, neural linkages that ordinarily wouldn't occur. And so sometimes those, when they become highly positive, and this is the kind of the numinous experience, what Jung would talk about as numinous, that people talk about as spiritual. It's this kind of broader metacognitive view. That's the way we talk about it, based on
What say that again? What was it called?
based on the work of Eliot and Brown, we call it a broader metacognitive view.
Okay.
Yeah, and so it's the perspective we take of the world, where we see the world from. And so the person that's really traumatized is seeing the world from, within their fear and within their self protection. When we go into a numinous state, we're experiencing the world from this profound interconnectivity, and connected to our family, connected to our community, connected to our species, connected to our environment. It's this profound kind of connected experience that is very real for people. And when people hold on to the experience of that after the psilocybin experience, that's when we get these kind of significant stage related changes, where people have an extended view of what it is to be a human being. That's the profundity of this work. It gives us a view of something that's kind of more closely related to how we'd understand a biological system anyway. We're an interconnected species, except most of us don't experience life that way. We experience it as alienated and fragmented, and in terrible circumstances that leads to great suffering. And that's what
Mm-hmm.
these unresponsive conditions like treatment-resistant PTSD, treatment-resistant depression, anxiety. They're people locked in their own world of suffering. So they get these numinous experiences, these expanded experiences, and all of a sudden they've got a different perspective on what it is to be a human. Very
Which is
different to other medications that
very,
we
very, very
use.
different. Yes, that's so true. And that's part of what the set and setting is so important, is because, again, you're wide open, you're free associating, you're not in control of where your mind goes,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
can be very frightening.
yeah, exactly.
And with psilocybin, you have more of a chance. It's a little bit more questionable, kind of what's going to come up for you. The MDMA tends to be more benevolent. The psilocybin is a little bit wider range,
Yeah,
but again, with the proper set and set with
yeah,
proper
correct. Yeah,
care, that gets channeled. So
that's
can you say
right.
more about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, the MDMA is a kind of more of an interpersonal kind of medicine. So it amplifies that serotonergic experience of being with and interrelated and, safe with, that kind of what Anthony Bateman calls epistemic trust, that experience of being trusting in your body, which is the work we do with David around attachment, trying to get people to have that experience of their embodiment. Psilocybin tends to be a more internal kind of process. So there's less of that interpersonal and more intrapersonal, which is why one of the things when we've taught this to therapists, we emphasise really strongly, and I emphasise preparation and integration as absolutely critical to this work. Because whilst having the internal experience of psilocybin is profound, if someone doesn't have the context in which to bring it into their day-to-day life, what tends to happen is it contracts and then becomes almost irrelevant to their day-to-day functioning after a while, and so you get this regression back to the mean, back to symptom after a period of time. So integration is really, really important in kind of creating, taking that state experience of the numinous of the interconnected and helping someone make sense of that in their day-to-day life. And that also becomes where we get into problems with psilocybin, because we don't really in the West have a strong explanatory paradigm. And this is where the three pillars work that Dan Brown and David Elliott have developed becomes really significant, because talking about metacognition, talking about the view that we take of the world, where we position ourselves from, frees up a lot of the kind of the religiosity that people bring into, or the spirituality that they bring into this space. And that's been, I think, a lot of the criticisms of MAPS as well, is not having this sort of explanatory paradigm. So when we use metacognition as a way of describing, then we've got a way to orient our integration of the numinous experience into something that's just a deeper kind of embeddedness in a biological system. Yes, we are interrelated. We all operate in an ecology. So here you go, you've got a taste of that as an experience now. It's not a conceptual thing, and you go back to being isolated in your office or in your your day-to-day life. You actually know that there is something more interconnected about being a human being. And you've known that through your direct experience of it in this non-ordinary state. So the integration becomes a really, really critical part of making this a valuable social activity. And that's very, very different to other therapies, where therapies are really about just trying to contain the symptoms, reduce the suffering, maybe generate a little bit more insight, but predominantly to kind of just control the negative state.
So, can you just give us just a thumbnail of when you talk about integration? Like, what are a couple, like maybe key features of integration that you're thinking of?
So it's really that embodied experience. So what is that? What does that feel like when you're in that interconnected place? When you're soaring like an eagle, what are you feeling?
Or in the
What are you
river
noticing?
or whatever? Yeah.
Yeah, what are you noticing in your body right now as you're talking about the memory of it? Just feel into that. Just notice that. So you're really trying to get the embodied quality of that state as a positive experience into someone's familiarity. Hebb's law, neurons that wire together fire together. So what we do is we just kind of repeat that connection. We're not creating anything. We're just helping people notice and direct their attention to something. So we're generating concentration practice. We're helping people direct their attention to features other than the suffering or the distress or whatever else was kind of creating problems for them. So we're generating a concentration practice, we're generating an awareness of state change, and then we're trying to turn that into some kind of narrative that makes sense to that person. So we're not saying go off and become a Buddhist or become a Christian mystic or something like that, which is some of the paradigms in the West that are seem to be available to us to describe this. We're trying to turn this into a personal experience.
That's
Take
so great. Yeah,
responsibility for yourself.
some of my experience in working, just some of my clients have had experiences like this, is there's almost always like a character or you know object or something that is meaningful that I can, if I can kind of grab a few of those things as they tell me about it, and I can remember them, and I just calling that up
Yeah,
will immediately bring them right back to it.
exactly.
Once you know the kind of their personal language, remember the fish with the eyelashes, or you know,
Exactly.
and it's just, it works so well, and also kind of amplifying for them, like what are their concrete things that they can take with them
Yeah,
um to carry it. Yeah,
yeah,
that's so
yeah, yeah.
so so you've been hinting at this, but you have concerns, and I have too. So let's talk about that. What are your concerns about what's happening?
Well, at the moment, um, the way it's sort of panning out in Australia is, we've got almost two kind of movements. We've got the kind of medical commercial establishment that see this as a good business model and a new medicine. And then we've got another group of younger kind of clinicians and practitioners that are getting an awful lot of experience out of working in the underground, out of working in indigenous practices, so shamanic practices, and having experiences there. And there's an absence of middle ground theory. So at one level, we've got this kind of practice of, this works, let's do more of it. And it's an expensive practice. So, we're talking about, something around the $25,000 per treatment. And a treatment will be 3 medicine sessions supported by some preparation and integration work along the way. So it's a time limited model, but extraordinarily expensive.
Wow, I did
So
not
that,
realize. Wow. Okay.
yeah,
Even
and that
the underground is that as well?
Well, the underground's very different, and that's incredibly variable. We've got so many shamans,
Right,
working
right, right.
in the community with no governance because
And it's
they're
unregulated,
regulating,
right.
unregulated because it's an illegal activity. So, what we don't have is a kind of middle ground theory of mind. What are these medicines actually doing? Well, to begin with, what is human consciousness? Because psychologists and psychiatrists don't agree on the thing that we're working with, the mind. If you talk to a medical a materialist, they'll talk about the mind as an extrusion of the brain. You talk to someone that comes from a cognitive behavioral paradigm, they'll talk about learning and cognition. Someone with a psychodynamic background will talk about forces and kind of underlying drives. So we don't have agreement. So we're disorganizing something using the medicine, and then we're trying to put it back together according to whatever theoretical construct we're working with. And there's just not a lot of reflection on that as process. So what we tend to see is some people will take a therapeutic modality like ACT or internal family systems or CBT, and they'll apply it to the medicine state. But of course, each of those models of practice have their own theories and philosophies underpinning them. So that means that there's going to be some kind of conformity applied to the person in the medicine state, if I make sense in this, so that the person is being kind of led in some way to a particular form of reorganization, which is not quite what we're trying to achieve with this medicine, which is to allow people to find their own natural organisation. And so the risks at the moment are that we've got competing schools, we've got a commercial medical model, we've got this sort of experiential kind of indigenous sort of inspired model, and no kind of middle ground where we're exploring this as a theory of mind, a theory of brain, a theory of change. That's not there. So that's what leads, I think, in many ways to some of the problems that MAPS have. Um, they don't have a sufficiently robust theory about what they're doing and why. That then leaves the field open to very conservative, ethics bound ways of controlling and containing, which will contract the opportunity for emergence.
Well,
newness.
if the goal is not to lead the integration and what happens afterwards, and to be non-directive and let the person do it for them, um, then what is so? But what's missing is theory of mind. How do we get around, if we create a theory of mind, not ending up doing the exact same thing?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's where the conversations lie, isn't it? And that's where, kind of bringing science and spirituality into a conversation. And I think, that's what Dan and David provided with this three pillars approach, because we applied the three pillars approach to the same approach we use in the attachment work. We applied to the psychedelic work, so collaboration, metacognition, and treatment. And so having this sort of idea of metacognition as an overarching theory of mind, the view we take of, the perspective we have of our engagement within the universe. That to me is a kind of a natural kind of orientation towards the theory of mind. So it's a theory of, mind as process and mind as perspective on process. So I think, there's lots of really interesting stuff in that we could, be developing.
Right. So, kind of what you're saying then is the theory itself builds into it the space for the client to create, and provides language that is kind of this blend and this marriage of science and the mystical,
Yeah,
leaving room for both, but not just mystical where that there's no grounding, and not so much grounding that it
correct.
contracts.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're trying to find a way to balance these different cultural traditions,
The,
and kind of because we need such a broad. This is what Ken Wilber's work about. The pre-trans fallacy that occurs in psychedelic work. So Ken's idea that people confuse kind of precognitive features of their trauma or their need with these post-cognitive experiences of the numinous. So the adult who, as a baby, wasn't given enough love, so maybe has a dismissing attachment style, has this experience in a psychedelic of being in the arms of the divine. All of a sudden, we've got this collapse of the pre-personal experience, something that hasn't been resolved at that attachment stage, is then collapsing into this sort of spiritual kind of belief system, and all of a sudden you've got someone leaving their psychedelic studies to join a mystical kind of communion or something. It's that kind of collapsing, because we don't have a really thorough and robust theory about spiritual bypass, pre-personal, uh, pre-trans kind of fallacies. It's not part of our general day-to-day thinking around this work. And when you start to apply that kind of recognition to psychedelic work, you see it all the time. You see, people will move from analytic regression into expansion, and it'll be happening, moment to moment. So as a therapist, you can never track that. Like, you can't know what's happening for that person until they come out and they start making sense of it. And you also don't want to be trying to shape that through a particular structured lens, because, you know, how do you connect a kind of an unmet infant need with one of these post personal interconnected kind of experiences? The person has to find a way to narrativize that for themselves, make meaning and purpose. But we need to be able to understand that kind of perspective as therapists. Otherwise, we'll foreclose the experience.
So I love what you're saying. Another thing about kind of something, the worry is this accessibility, and related to finances, just related to, you can't find anybody underground if you don't know somebody. There can be expense. I'm wondering, in Australia, are like, does insurance or other coverage for these kinds of medicines or treatments? Yeah,
No,
it's all
no,
private.
that's part of the problem at the moment, and because the demands on production are so refined, it's expensive to produce, because we're producing a kilo at a time, and having a whole kind of laboratory set up to produce that is extraordinarily expensive, and the insurers haven't come at it because there's not enough of an evidence base yet to back this. So what we've got in Australia is an ecology where there's a lot of trials. So lots of university-sponsored trials are going on. Some of the private providers have got into the trial space as well, in concert with universities. And then you've got the out-of-pocket payments for it, which, as I said, it's positioning around the $25,000
Wow.
Australian.
So, if people were interested, it sounds like you have fantastic ideas around this. I love the marriage of, this cautionary, filling in this middle space. What would people do? Are you training people in this, or like what's happening?
Yeah, we run trainings down here in Australia, and we're also in the process of building some online training. Our particular interest is in integration. So I
Yeah,
think that's
that makes
really
sense.
the area that's just not being explored adequately at all.
I totally
So
agree.
we're about to launch a new website, so that's a couple of months away, but we're just finishing that off. But where we're really encompassing a theory of mind along with a description of development, and detailed neurological development as well as psychological development. And we're kind of positioning that within the context of the three pillars approach. And so really trying
So, do
to,
you know, like, so this will publish, and soon thereafter, the website will go up.
yeah,
Do we have a guess of what that website's gonna be called?
it's integrative psychology and medicine.com.au.
Integrative Psychology and Medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So the
And then
idea
that's a
is
go ahead.
we're trying to integrate, create a collaborative environment. When we train people from diverse clinical backgrounds, so psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, nurses. We had a training week workshop a couple of weeks ago, and some of the trainees from 4 years ago came along, and they were still talking about their ongoing collaborative community that we established in our training. We can't do this work as individuals. This kind of idea of one-on-one therapy with psychedelics doesn't work. You need a whole community of professionals with different skills, experiences. So we really work with a collaborative view, and that's really what we mean by integrative. You know,
That's right.
keeping clarity and specificity around skills and technique, but
And is
engaging.
it is it a is it connected to the attachment course at all? Are these two parallel things? How does
Yeah,
that?
the parallel. So the attachment course is a parallel course. That's one we're specifically running with David. But a lot of the work that David and Dan has done informs our work in psychedelics and in other features. We're very interested in teaching on metacognition, which is a kind of an emerging field in psychology. Starting
What
to
is?
get
I'm sorry. Say that again. Medical what?
metacognition.
Metacognition. Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so that's the Bateman font. Mary Main is the kind of
Yes, of
you know
course. Yes, yes, yes.
Zinger, Fonagy Allen.
Reflective function. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And John Allen's work at Manager.
Yeah. Mind sight. Dan
Yeah,
Siegel calls it mind sight. Yep.
yeah,
hmm
yeah,
Okay. Interesting. 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 So, and yeah. So what I like about this is that we can get so excited about it. It's like, oh my gosh, this is gonna change mental health care delivery, and how is this going to look for practitioners? But I
yeah,
see that we've got a really, really long way to go. Lots of training to do.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah. For me, it kind of really positions psychotherapy. Whatever your professional background, psychotherapy becomes as much a socio-political activity as it is as a health activity, because it's about transformation of lives, transformation of relationships, transformations of community. And we've seen that very, very clearly in the attachment work. You change someone's attachment style, you change their relationships, you change the way they operate in community. So taking that approach to other areas of psychotherapy, like psychedelic work, it's just opening up that whole kind of idea that like psychology should provide hope to us as an
and
evolutionary principle.
boy, do we need hope. That
Don't
is
do what?
boy, do we need hope. And um, just kind of wrapping all the way around that the molecules themselves aren't all of the magic.
No,
That you mentioned the holotropic breath work, and that if we as therapists can begin to even work on this wider basis, including spirituality, including the psyche, including more indigenous wisdoms that have been around that have been we've kind of shut out,
correct.
that in and of itself is going to be more connecting.
Correct.
Right, it's going to get us. It's going to get us a long way.
Yeah. No single culture or practice or tradition has all the answers. So, it's time we started really getting into collaborative conversations and working out what each of us bring to the picture.
I could not agree more, and it is an exciting time right now that as we're becoming more aware of our myopic views and our education, that our very narrow river of education has given us. There's a
Yeah.
whole world out there.
Yeah.
Real quick, we didn't talk about some of the other psychedelics, ibogaine and things like that. I'm hearing a lot about that. What are your thoughts about some of those other ones that are kind of considered more extreme?
Yeah, I mean, ibogaine and iboga, have a different kind of psychoactive principle, and they're also a lot more time consuming. But I don't have a lot of personal experience in treatment with iboga, but colleagues that work particularly in the addictions field have had incredible success with it. Ketamine is another one that's very popular. Uh, Again, that has a dissociative effect, so very different. It works on the glutamate receptors rather than serotonin, so very different action. It also doesn't seem to generalize as well, but has been very, very profoundly positive for some people. We've done work with cannabis, prescription cannabis, and using that in talk therapy, finding that to be an extraordinarily powerful way of helping people approach traumatic memory, reconstruct biographical experience through a particular blend of cannabis that we use. So there's all sorts of options, and they all kind of fall under the category of state change technologies. I've got an interest in Dzogchen meditation, which is a Tibetan practice of mind, which again has a whole lot of state change kind of processes involved. So I don't think
So,
that medicine
what is that interesting practice?
Dzogchen,
Soul
uh,
chain.
Dzogchen. Um, it's a Tibetan, and it's an advanced Tibetan concentration meditation practice. So it has embedded in it its own kind of theory of mind, but that's from a Tibetan context. So it's sort of embedded in their cultural and religious traditions. So we've been doing a lot of work in trying to extract the active ingredients from it, so to speak, to use that as technique to change perspective and view. Uh,
So
or,
state change technology.
yeah, yeah,
Very interesting. I keep hearing kind of both the medical, or the theoretical with the spiritual. That's very intentional. That you're
yeah,
braiding those together.
yeah. I mean, if we call something spiritual, we still need to be able to test it and be able to understand what it is we think it is, and therefore creating a sort of set of conditions that someone else can replicate. Um,
Yeah. Now,
it
and oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
doesn't take the sacred qualities away from it. Yeah,
And ketamine is currently legal here in the United States. We're seeing an explosion, and certainly the same, mad dash for the corporate world related to ketamine. And but I always consider ketamine very different than the psychedelic.
yeah, very.
Exactly, because it's does seem to like need to be repeated and it doesn't seem to have that same. But what just as we're kind of wrapping up in the United States, so MDMA got stopped or at least hit a roadblock for the moment. Um, but psilocybin, I think, is still on its marching along as far as legalization. Is that right?
In America, they haven't actually made the decision on MDMA yet. It's just that what it looked like was just going to be a kind of a green light all the way through now seems to be a bit of an amber light, but it
Oh,
hasn't
okay.
hasn't been knocked on the head yet. And I think the researchers involved in the development of psilocybin were a little bit further behind in terms of the phase 3 trials than MDMA. So, but they're just about there, I think, in terms of application.
Okay. All right. Well, what else would you like to share with our audience, who I know this has been so valuable to get this perspective for somebody with such a, boots on the ground
Yeah.
experience?
Well, I guess the central message that I like to kind of provide to people is the idea of hope and change. And we do that through all of our trainings. We do that through the attachment repair work. We do that through the psychedelic work. We do that through our trauma work. I mean, in order to do this work, we need to be hopeful. And a lot of this work is about building skills in people to navigate their own minds. We've just finished a small trial in working with the healthy population, trying to help them develop internal navigating skills, sort of opening up that idea of internal family systems into something a little bit more sort of consciousness oriented. And we've had some really good feedback from that as an experiment. But just really, I think where we're at, we've got to evolve as a species, because we're not going in a good direction if we don't. And that evolution is really about taking personal responsibility for our own consciousness, really being able to learn how to return to ourselves, create our own sense of trust and connectedness. For so many of us that haven't had that from birth, just really kind of understanding that neuroplasticity, which is a concept that's only 20 odd years old, allows us to really demonstrate that change is possible for anyone. We just have to find, and often that requires appropriate support and encouragement and skill development. But this whole field of psychotherapy, has an incredible opportunity to help this society, all our societies, to become more resilient, more trusting, more interpersonal, more caring. So that's our kind of central message.
Yeah, I so resonate. Our book that we just published, Secure Relating, is exactly the same, and we have taken attachment and expanded that into systems that create insecurity, and really looking
Yeah.
at that same exact thing of that we need each other, and it's overwhelming right now, and we can either kind of be dissociated and overwhelmed, or angrily shaking our fist into the air,
Yeah. Yeah.
or really do this work to stay engaged and
Yeah.
take care of ourselves and take care of our sisters and
Yeah.
brothers and all the genders in between and all around. And so this message, I just cannot tell you how much I love. So I so appreciate you. So again, I'm with Nigel Denning. And can you say again, if you missed the beginning, one of the things, he is connected with David Elliott, and I and Kelly and myself highly recommend their course for any clinician that is interested in working with adults with attachment. And we do have an affiliate code for that. Just put in Therapist Uncensored. And if you find them at info at, what is it again?
Integrative Attachment Therapy.com.
Integrativeattachmenttherapy.com. Integrativeattachmenttherapy.com. Definitely, highly, highly, highly recommend. And then the new website is, say that again?
Integrative Psychology and Medicine.com.
Wonderful.
That'll be
And
out
if,
in about a month.
great. And then if people wanted to reach you directly, how would they find you?
Current website is Integrative Psychology, so it's Nigel at integrativepsychology.net.au.
Okay, can you repeat that just for people to, if they're
Nigel,
scribbling quickly?
Nigel at integrativepsychology.net.au.
Wonderful. And of course, all of these things will be in our show notes. And you'll find always really cool things in our show notes. If you are still listening, it means I hope that you found value. And we could really appreciate helping us get this word out of this podcast that has all of these great free resources, absolutely free to the public, by going to wherever you get your podcasts and leaving us a rating and review. That really helps people find it. and it is so much appreciated. And in the meantime, we will send, thank you very much, Nigel, and we will see you around the
Thank
bend.
you.